Thank you to the Wellesley College Blue Notes. What a wonderful way to start the ceremony. President Johnson, distinguished alumni, students, parents, faculty, staff, and guests, good evening. I'm Georgia Murphy Johnson, class of 1975, and president of the Wellesley College Alumnae Association. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2016 Alumnae Achievement Awards ceremony. The awards were established by the Alumnae Association in 1970 to recognize the outstanding accomplishments of Wellesley graduates, and they remain the highest honor that Wellesley bestows. The tradition of the Alumnae Achievement Awards is continued thanks to the commitment and dedication of the Alumnae Achievement Awards Selection Committee. The committee is charged with the daunting task of selecting from Wellesley's remarkable alumni body a few individuals who have brought particular honor to themselves and to the college through demonstrated excellence in their chosen fields of endeavor. Committee members meet throughout the year, carefully reading thousands of pages of information about the nominees' work and professional achievements. We extend our heartfelt thanks to the selection committee members for their dedication and care throughout the selection process, both those members who chose tonight's honorees and those who will carry on this important work. Please hold your applause until I have introduced each of these wonderful volunteers. Committee Chair Charlene Merle-Smith, class of 1973. Please stand. Sadie Burton-Goss, class of 78. Andrea Goodman, class of 92. Willa Jean McLean, class of 77. Teresita Ramos, class of 93. Jamie Scarborough, class of 87. Julie Ing Stern, class of 83. And Karen Whitley, class of 90. Unfortunately, two members of the committee, Beth Bernhardt, class of 79, and Sarah Wall-Randall, class of 97, are unable to join us tonight. Thank you all for your service to the Alumnae Association and to the college. I would also like to recognize all the past Achievement Award recipients who have joined us for tonight's festivities. Please stand as I call your name and the year you were honored. Again, please hold your applause until the end. Susan McGee Bailey, class of 63, recipient in 2012. Wendy Gillespie, class of 72, recipient in 2012. Carol Johnson, class of 51, recipient in 2004. Jean Kilborn, class of 64, recipient in 2015. Olivia Hood Parker, class of 63, recipient in 1996. Judy Ann Bigby, class of 73, recipient in 2007. And if I have missed any other past recipients, please stand so that we can recognize you. You remain an inspiration to us all. Of course, our program would not be complete without our president, Dr. Paula A. Johnson, who is here tonight to help present these awards. Paula?
Thank you, Georgia. And I just want to begin by saying congratulations to our recipients. And thank you to the Alumnae Association for all that you do for not only us here on campus, but for Wellesley alumni throughout the world. For 46 years, the Alumnae Association has sustained the tradition of honoring the outstanding accomplishments of Wellesley alumni in virtually all arenas. Each recipient of the Alumnae Achievement Award is distinguished by the way her unique path from Wellesley forward has led to significant contributions in making the world a better place. Over the years, recipients have been drawn from the fields of business, education, medicine, the arts, science, social activism, law, international affairs, journalism, public policy, and community service, proving that a Wellesley woman's place in the world is wherever she chooses it to be. True. The only typical path for a Wellesley alumna is the one that she forges with the courage and passion of her own convictions. In just a moment, we'll present the 2016 Alumnae Achievement Awards, but first, I'm pleased to present the Wellesley College Choir performing We Are. The choir is conducted by Lisa Graham, the Evelyn Barry Director of Choral Music and Lecturer of Music here at Wellesley.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Put this down here. It is now my privilege and great pleasure to introduce to you the recipients of the 2016 Alumnae Achievement Award. Marian Burros, class of 1954, has been a transformative influence in American writing about food, health, nutrition, agriculture, and food safety, both as a cookbook author and journalist. She reported for the New York Times for 27 years, and from 1974 to 1981, she was food editor at the Washington Post. Marian majored in English at Wellesley. Coming onto the scene when Americans had tired of TV dinners but didn't always have time to master the art of French cooking, Marian showed a knack for adapting complicated restaurant recipes for home chefs. Over the years, she has published 13 books about food and cooking. The first book, Elegant but Easy, a collection of recipes and a guide to entertaining, was written in 1960 with Lois Levine, Wellesley class of 1952. They cranked out 500 copies on a mimeograph machine, collated them on Lois's bed, and sold them to bookstores and through Wellesley clubs. According to Marian, quote, one thing led to another, and after a while, someone wanted to publish it. That was the beginning of our cookbook career. This first book also helped launch Marian's newspaper career, initially as a food writer at a couple of local Maryland newspapers. That led to a position as the food editor at the Washington Daily News. The so-called women's pages those days shared recipes and helped readers navigate the new items appearing on grocery store shelves. Marian, who inherited a love of cooking from her mother, had a gift for converting complicated recipes into something more approachable for the home cook. As her career progressed, Marian started writing increasingly about food safety and how federal decisions affected the ingredients that Americans were plating up for dinner each night. It took the newspapers some time to catch up with Marian. When she would say that food is political, over and over again people would ask, what's political about food? Through her consistent and careful reporting over the decades, Marian helped all of us understand the politics of food. She covered decades of White House food initiatives, from the Reagan administration's proposal to classify ketchup as vegetable in school lunches, to First Lady Michelle Obama's efforts to combat childhood obesity. Marian has also revealed the politics at play in food safety regulations, animal welfare, industrial agricultural practices, product labeling, and federal lunch programs. In the early years of her newspaper career, she was likely the first writer to cover red dye number 2. Later on, she helped reveal the connection between antibiotic overuse in farm animals and antibiotic resistance in humans. And every time the pendulums of diets trends swung, low sugar, low fat, high protein, high fat, low carb, you know, you get it, Marian would investigate the latest claims, arming readers with facts. In so doing, Marian often wrote for the national desks at the Post and at the Times, bringing important stories beyond the food section. In one investigative piece on the mislabeling of wild salmon, Marian had to endure strong criticism and threatening phone calls. For consumers, though, the report represented a watershed moment. The rise in informed consumers marks one measure of Marian's work, and the number of other journalists tackling these subjects now is another. The food industry is only growing more complicated, and small armies of writers have stepped up to help tackle these complexities. Marian's many professional honors include Tastemaker Awards for 2 of the 13 cookbooks she's written, as well as a National Press Club citation. And her plum torte recipe remains the most requested recipe in the Times archive and its most published. Marian and Paula, would you please join me at the podium? Marian, you have been a transformative influence in the world of food and lifestyle journalism. While your books taught us that cuisine didn't have to be dauntingly complex to be delicious, you also made your mark early on as an advocate for healthier, more sustainable eating. You opened up a world to those in your field as well as the American consumer. Your tough reporting and coverage of food safety issues transformed our understanding of food, and you helped all of us become more savvy about our food choices. You have been recognized with many professional honors, including a National Press Club citation for your New York Times coverage of food safety issues in 1988. As much as you have added to our understanding about food, your work also reminds us to celebrate the private, everyday experience of sharing special meals with family and friends. And of course, the delight of having a torte for dessert. For all of these accomplishments, Wellesley honors you.
Thank you. President Johnson, faculty, students, fellow alums, awardees, guests, and my dear family. I've had more than a year to stew about how I got from housewife and mother to this great honor. And Wellesley did have a lot to do with how it all turned out, but it was not apparent in 1954 when I graduated. Then I was quite certain that what I wanted to do more than anything else was be a wife and mother. In fact, I was so anxious, I got married at the end of my junior year, and by the end of 1955, I had a child who's sitting in the audience right now. It wasn't until the late 50s that it began to dawn on me that maybe there was something more I wanted to do. And I was especially lucky, I think, especially looking at the world now, because I did come to my career through domestic arts, writing cookbooks. Or maybe it was just dumb luck. Marrying early gave me and my friend Lois Libeskind-Levine, class of '52, a head start in recipe collection. And as our friends married, Lois and I were in great demand for our supposed cooking skills. The newly married begged to share our recipes. We were in such demand that by the summer of 1958, we decided to move the recipes they were clamoring for from the 3x5 cards into manuscript form. We repaired to Lois's unheated basement in New Haven and set to work with the aid of a hand-cranked mimeograph machine. I bet most people in the audience don't even know what it looks like. 10 days later, we had 200 copies of the 195-page paperback we called Elegant but Easy. The pages of the book were collated by running around Lois's bed, which she put in the middle of the floor, on the first floor, not the basement. The cover was done by a friend. The book cost $1.25, and my stepfather, Riley, said that we were putting an awful lot of energy into making 25-cent book profit. But we went back to work, upgrading to an electric mimeograph machine, and produced 500 additional copies. We also peddled directly to bookstores, of which there were many in those days, and kept copies in the trunks of our cars, just in case someone at a party wanted one. And we were shameless. And then Wellesley intervened. The Wellesley Club of Washington, where I was living by 1960, wanted to sell the books to raise money to help pay for the dancing classes offered by the club for children of alums. You didn't know about that, did you? To no one's surprise, the dancing classes have gone the way of the mimeograph machines. But sometime after the club began selling Elegant but Easy, which led to other clubs selling it across the country, Margaret Clapp, the president of the college at the time, came to Washington. She was a charming woman with a very kind smile and a wicked sense of humor. In the receiving line, I was introduced to her as the person who has written a cookbook that is being used for fundraising for the club. She smiled at me as she shook my hand and she said, "You didn't learn that at Wellesley, did you?" Well, yes and no. Eventually, we found a publisher for the first real book, leading to further opportunities, as mentioned here. First to write a weekly column for a small paper, and then Washington's daily papers. And I want you to know that my first job at a daily paper came because the food editor there wanted to stop working so she could go home and have children. And she called me up and asked me if I'd like the job, and that's how I got my first job. I also got a gig as a consumer reporter for the NBC television station in Washington. And I had always loved politics. Almost changed my major, in fact, to political science here. So it's not surprising that living in Washington heightened my sense that everything comes down to politics. And eventually it dawned on me that our government does have a very important role in how and what the food industry sells us. My love of politics probably goes back to when I was 8. Stay with me just for a second. I didn't have a Halloween costume for trick-or-treating, and my mother dressed me in a long black velvet coat with a little white rabbit collar and told me to tell the people who came to give us candy that I was a suffragette. I should mention that my mother was president of the League of Women Voters. And as the daughter of a doctor, I have always been interested in food and health. So even though I never gave up writing recipes and cooking stories, I began to write about the politics of food, about all the things you heard about just before, and I won't repeat them again. But what I learned was how many ways the deck is stacked against us. And we need a lot of information to have a fighting chance to get very big and very powerful industry. Government should regulate the safety of what the food industry sells and how it markets to children especially. And it should regulate what farmers put on their crops. Not everyone agrees. Back in the 60s, I began to describe food as political, and I won't repeat that part either because it's already been said. But no one asks the question anymore. We've all become much more sophisticated about food and the industry, and the industry knows it, and in its own way it's responding, though not enough. All of these things, politics, science, and writing, started to come together when I went to work for the Washington Star, and increased significantly when I went to work for the Washington Post. Occasionally, the Post cartoonist, one of the world's greatest, Herblock, would ask me to come to his office as he was putting finishing touches on the next day's cartoon, one that had something to do with the story I was writing. He wanted to know if the cartoon had the message right. Well, of course it had. It was Herblock. But can you imagine how exciting it was for a food writer from the women's department to be consulted? It was thrilling. I adored that man. When I went to the New York Times in 1981, the politics of food became an even more important part of what I wrote. And despite the fact that I was hardly the best English lit major here, by a long shot, the liberal arts education I got at college was perfect for what I finally did, as it is, I think, for just about everything. What I learned at Wellesley was how to learn, how to think critically, how to think ahead, how to be precise, above all, to ask questions and be persistent. Learning how to think critically certainly teaches you not to take things at face value. Precision is essential, especially if you are writing critically about a company, a product, a regulation, the use of potentially harmful ingredients. You have to have an airtight case and be able to prove everything you write, because the editor will be coming by your desk pretty soon to say, here's the complaint we have, your latest complaint against you from some irate subject. So you have to dot every I and every T. But the first time I found out that I had detractors, angry ones, was when I was working in television. After one broadcast, I have no memory of what it was about. Someone anonymously wrote to tell me I was, and I quote, an intellectual whore. I'd never been called either before. When I got over the shock, I decided it was a high honor because someone had actually been listening. Years later at the New York Times, one of the investigative pieces I wrote about, the salmon, the farm salmon was being sold around New York City as wild. Wild salmon has significantly fewer calories than farmed, less fat, fewer pollutants than farmed, and costs twice as much. I received a phone call before we had caller ID from someone who said he was a fishmonger in the wholesale market. He threatened to cut me off at the knees for exposing the fraud. I abandoned the subway and took a taxi to and from work for several weeks. But perhaps my favorite put down occurred in 1978 when an item in the Washington newspaper gossip column said, nutritional flash, Marian Burros, NBC's foe of junk food, has been offered 5 figures from a baking industry lobbyist to pose with a Hostess Twinkie. Strictly platonic. The lobbyist worked for ITT Continental Baking, the company that produced the Twinkies, as well as a product called Fresh Horizons, a white bread that it claimed had a lot of fiber. And it did, but not from the usual sources. It turned out to be fiber from wood pulp. And when I reported that Continental was putting wood pulp in its bread, the company threatened legal action, but it never carried out the threat. I retired 8 years ago from what I think was the best job anyone could ever have. I met fascinating people I never would have met otherwise, and I went to exotic places I never would have seen. And I got to ask questions I never could have asked otherwise. But now that I'm retired, mostly, I can confess I miss the occasional dart. I haven't had a good one since 2009, but boy, was I good company that occasion. The Critic, a blogger who doesn't believe in climate change and has a close association with the cigarette industry, described me as the New York Times fossilized, elitist, organic food nag that should be put out to pasture where she can chew her cud. Someone else calling women old cows. He continued, dumber, more dishonest, take your pick, than Burros is Michelle Obama, whose political gardening at the White House this blog has noted previously. It makes you long for the days of Bess Truman when First Ladies were hardly ever seen or much less heard. Right now, that blogger must be smoking 2 packs a day, because in a little more than 3 weeks, there's a good possibility a former First Lady, a Wellesley girl, will be on her way to the Oval Office. Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Franchise.
Yes.
It's from the first Clinton administration.
Yeah. Maria Morris Hambourg, class of 1971, is a highly regarded art historian and curator. Maria majored in art history at Wellesley and earned a master's and PhD in art history from Columbia University. Maria's championing of photography led to the creation in 1992 of the new Department of Photographs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with her as the curator. It was the first time in decades that a new department had been established at the museum, and her success in creating it within a deeply traditional institution like the Met has been called, quote, perhaps her most enduring achievement. But it is also fascinating to learn how Maria got to that point. Maria's coursework at Wellesley played an incredibly fortuitous role in the direction of her career. Maria took a class on 19th century French art with then Professor of Art Eugenia Perry and was captivated. She went on to take Professor Perry's seminar on the history of photography, which was where she first saw images by early French photographer Eugène Auger, and she was electrified. After graduating, Maria's prodigious energy propelled her into graduate school at Columbia, an internship at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and eventually a PhD dissertation on Auger. Her mentor was John Sarkowski, who served as MoMA's curator of photographs from 1962 to 1991. The museum had acquired a collection of Auger's pictures, but no one understood his numbering system. So it was impossible to establish a chronology of his work. Maria spent her after hours deciphering the numbering system, an act of scholarly audacity that not only informed her dissertation, but also established her reputation. She was awarded a PhD in 1980 and collaborated with Sarkowski on a 4-volume examination of Auger's work published in the early 1980s. Seeking further opportunities, Maria moved over to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1985, working as an associate curator in the Department of Prints and Photographs. The Met's photography collection was spotty, so Maria set about enlarging it. She launched exhibitions, garnered such attention for photography that the Met's director created a separate Department of Photographs in 1992 with Maria at the helm. She developed close collaborations with photographers, artists, and collectors, gathered support from the Met trustees, and wrote catalogs and essays. Later, when her name was floated as a possible candidate to take over as curator at the MoMA, she stayed at the Met, making the very intentional decision to stay where she had the opportunity to build the collection itself. In 1987, Maria served as one of the primary matchmakers in the Met's receipt of what at the time was the largest corporate gift ever made in the United States to acquire art. The gift from the Ford Motor Company was used to acquire the John C. Waddell collection of approximately 500 interwar avant-garde photographs. In 2005, Maria spearheaded the acquisition of the entire Gilman Paper Company collection of photographs, another coveted trove. Beyond the acquisitions, Maria brought a sense of expertise to the Met's photography collection. She recognized the poetry of the images entrusted to her, and she wrote poetically about them. She looked beyond the image to everything that had gone into the making of the picture: the photographer's eye and intention, the artistic milieu and social climate, the choice of subject, technique, equipment, paper, exposure, emulsion. She exhibited photographs like paintings in specially chosen frames and carefully hung galleries. In 2004, Maria resigned as curator in charge. She had largely fulfilled her ambition to create a world-class collection at the Met, and she was ready to shift out of her highly visible role and spend more time with her family. Today, Maria continues to collaborate on exhibitions and catalogs as an independent scholar, working with her colleagues at the Met and also for other museums, including MoMA. Maria's work has captivated the attention of artists, curators, and art connoisseurs worldwide. With her frequent co-author, Pierre Aproxine, she received an Infinity Award for writing from the International Center for Photography in 1994. Maria's publications include the work of Ache with John Sarkowski, The Waking Dream, Photography's First Century, selections from the Gilman Paper Company, and Earthly Bodies, Irving Penn's Nudes, 1949 to 1950. Maria also serves on the board of directors of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. Maria and Paula, please join me at the podium. Maria, you are a curator, preeminent art scholar, and photography champion. You made a lasting mark on the Metropolitan Museum of Art when, as a curator, your promotion of photography led to the creation of the Department of Photographs. Through your efforts, the Met acquired 2 prestigious collections, and you raised the Met's profile as a world-class photography collection. Your work has captivated the attention of artists, curators, and art connoisseurs worldwide. You have constructed a rich professional and personal life, a life with a deep cultural engagement at its center. For all this, Wellesley honors you.
That was the shortest speech ever. It's already over, right? Yeah, exactly. You keep telling everything, so I don't have anything to say. I was asked to speak to the students, but I don't think there are any students here. Any students here? Oh, there are a few. Okay, all right. Great. I know that many of you have laser focus on your future careers and that you're already quasi-professionals. Unlike you, when I arrived at Wellesley in '67, I was not focused. I vaguely hoped that by being here, I would not end up like my mother, who was only a mother, as I thought. It took me about 30 years to get my head straight on that, and today I am very proud to say that my children are my greatest joy and satisfaction. And also that I have enormous respect for my late mother. But I still don't consider myself a professional, even though I spent many years being one. And that's partly because I just fell into it without intention. It happened right off the bat when I attended the first classes in the introductory course of art called Art 100. It's a big, dark auditorium with comfy seats, and I settled in and was dazzled by these huge images that were glowing on the screen, and then the disembodied voices of the professors who were explaining, it was sort of like, God talking, explaining everything that all the questions that would pop up in your mind, the answers would just come, I was instantly entranced. The verbal, the historical, the emotional, and the sensual were all mixed up and anchored in the visual and in me. So sitting there, for example, looking at a statue of a Greek athlete, for example, I could feel the tension in his solar plexus in mine. Or I could walk into the immense pavement of the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul in awe of this billowing vastness of the space under those big domes. It was a kind of multi-sensory thraldom, and it was unlike anything I knew. It was not, a regular lecture where, you took notes and you memorized the facts. It was an experience of an altogether different order. And this experience was this sort of very flexible and multivalent, and it was an understanding that kept opening further and further to what art could attain, what art could address. And that expanded sense of art somehow included me and what I might grow to understand. So in short, I fell utterly into art, and the ravishment and the self-enlargement of the very act of attending to it. The fact that my father was an architect and my mother had studied art history had a lot to do with my receptivity, for sure. So through all 4 years that I was here at Wellesley, I was immersed in it, in art history. I couldn't get enough of it. I ran to the library after classes, pardon me, to soak up more. And I studied in the museums in Boston and in Cambridge. And I hung out in the galleries, which were then in Jewett Art Center, not in the Davis Art Museum. So I was in Jewett. That's where I was all the time. And that's where I was in the last month of my senior year when one of my professors chanced to walk by, saw me, and asked me what I was going to do after graduation. Indecisive would be a nice way to put it. I was totally clueless. I mean, really clueless. So this kind professor kind of bundled me along to the conference room where he was going. And in the conference room, the rest of the art history faculty was gathered waiting for him. And he comes in with me, and they kind of scratch their heads and say, how could she be so aimless? They over their glasses of sherry, they did offer me one. I said no. Over their glasses of sherry, they decided that I should go to graduate school. So one of my teachers had some pull at Columbia, so she got the phone. We had rotary phones. Called up, talked to the department head. This is all, and we were all gathered there together. And he said, well, okay, we got room for one more. But he said, but tell her to fill out the application anyway. I don't think it's done that way anymore. And it was really a fluke. But it's especially a fluke for me because I hadn't wanted to go to college in the first place. But my Wellesley mom had herded me in here. And now I was headed to graduate school because my teachers knew what was good for me. So I have to hand it to the Wellesley faculty. Those of you who are here, you do a great job of it. Not only like a mother cat picking up a wayward kitten, in my case, but at Columbia, I found that I had, a reasonable grasp of the history, and like Marian, I'd learned to read between the lines and make a reasonable argument. And because I'd listened for 4 years to wonderfully articulate people, I really sort of reconstituting in words how works of art wove their magic spells, both objectively and subliminally. I sought out professors, again, of the first quality, who could further my lessons in how art conveys its payload of content. I chose as my field modern art and architecture, and this was partly to make my study more relevant, because this was in the 60s, remember, and the Vietnam War was coloring everything, and so the present, which was so complicated, needed as much explanation and context as was possible. And so I thought, well, I better study. Renaissance art is marvelous, but I better figure out what's going on today. And I wanted to minor in photography, a medium whose continuity with my existence I could also recognize, having grown up on picture magazines and seeing how it related to the world. As Georgia mentioned, the photography bug had bitten me at Wellesley because I had lucked into the first ever course in the history of the medium, which was offered in 1969 by Eugenia Perry. And she became, for me, a kind of Pied Piper. She was such an inspiring, even a sort of electrifying professor. I sometimes thought I could see electric sparks coming out of her head. She was amazing. And I loved photography's window onto the real world, its objectivity, and also its subjectivity, the way that the facts that it conveys are always only one person's point of view. And I remain fascinated by the medium's ability to seamlessly encapsulate both what is seen and a vision of it. So although I couldn't study photographic history at Columbia because there was no field yet, nobody taught photography, I made up a course of study from random exhibits around New York and also self-directed readings. But because there were no courses on photography at Columbia, there were no books on photography. And so therefore, I became a regular in the study room at the Museum of Modern Art. And there, I sat at a big table, and I was flanked on one side by the library and on the other by the greatest collection, arguably, of modern photographs in the world. And on the opposite side were the departmental offices. And the office of the chief curator, who was this very brilliant and engaging man, was right there. So I'd be sitting there with my head in a book or looking at some prints, and bang! In the door would come John Tchaikovsky and Gary Winogrand, who was this sort of battering ram of a man with a couple of cameras slung around his neck and a story to tell. And they were talking away. Or it might be Lee Friedlander, who is he's always had his baseball cap on, had his sort of gimlet eyes glittering there under his visor, and his vest would be overflowing with these yellow Kodak cartridges, that he'd just shot. And I couldn't help overhearing. These are absolutely first-rate artists. It's like if you were in the 19th century having Degas and Manet and, coming in and talking right in front of you. And it was really an amazing thing. And the way they talked with Tchaikovsky right there also sort of overran the table. So they'd get their pictures out and they'd put them all on the table, and I'd be sitting there on the side of it. So I was just, this was hands down better than school. It was really fascinating. And so I wrangled an internship there and found that the stuff I was told to do was really dumb, and kind of clerical, and I thought I was kind of smart, and I really didn't have a very good time doing the things that I had to do during the day, but at night, it was worth it, because I had the run of the place. And it was not like, Ben Stiller in Night at the Museum at all. Actually, it was quiet as a tomb after the curators had gone home. And so I would marinate myself in the photographs. I would look box after box and evening after evening finding those that moved me, that engaged my curiosity, that vibrated in my memory. I had absolutely no plan. I had just simply taken the year off from Columbia, and I was steeping myself in these images for the pleasure of it. And when I had more questions than answers about the work of that photographer that we were talking about, a guy named Ache, I hatched the notion that it would be nice to visit Paris and to see what he had photographed. And so then I figured that if I bunched all these questions together and called them a dissertation proposal, that somebody might give me a grant and pay my way. And that's exactly what happened. So I spent a year in Paris, and I took along my younger sister for company, which was great. And that led to this 5-year collaboration, which was with Tchaikovsky on that series of books and exhibitions. And they sort of established the beginning of a field of the history of photography. And I should add again that my introduction to this artist and to photography was originally at Wellesley, so in 1969. So I owe a great deal to the college for not only the training, but also the subject matter, as well as getting me into graduate school. And then, as things do, things worked out. Just when I'd finished my work at MoMA, a vacancy opened up for a junior person at the Metropolitan Museum in the print room. And I had also taken a course from Nia Janis in prints. But I believed I was a modernist, and so I never thought I would work at the Met. And the photo collection was really pretty musty and, not a brilliant collection. But it was a great print room, and it was a job. So viewing photographs in the context of prints, and for example, Rembrandt's etchings and Goya's lithographs, allowed me to see that photography was not an inherently modern medium, as it had seemed at MoMA, but rather a picture-making system arising from and related to painterly traditions with a much longer historical arc. When I came to New York, it was 1971, and that was the year of the first auctions and the first gallery of photography. And by the time I was at the Met, photography market had begun to really heat up. And so it was forcing rare images, mostly 19th century and turn of the century images, out of the attics and off of the shelves and out of the great houses of Europe and onto the auction block. So there was a sort of torrent of treasures, and I was able to augment the collection at the Met with by selecting, from these pictures that were really discoveries. We didn't know as much about them then as we do now. And I tried to, as it was explained, I tried to display these pictures in ways that enhance their individual complexions, their histories, their artistic connectivity. So I spent a lot of time working with framers and matters and designers, working on wall colors and lighting and explanatory panels, other installation strategies to highlight their exceptionalism. And so as I educated myself with research and through comparisons with other collections and traveling, I also educated the public. And so gradually the value that I and the assistants that I was hiring placed on these photographs became conspicuous. Collectors, more and more collectors began great collections, and they vied, of course, for the best images. Our museum vied for their collections. And eventually, as the major acquisitions and minor acquisitions, the exhibitions, the catalogs accumulate, the books, the library, the medium no longer fit comfortably in its little nest under the wing of the Department of Prints. And so a newly fledged independent department was founded in 1992, and it took its place alongside Egyptian art and European painting, Asian art, and so on. the medium seemed to have come of age, and it deserved a place at the table. Now, I think there are a couple lessons here. And the first is that for those of you who don't have a specific profession in mind, my example may give you some comfort. Don't worry. Just follow the sparks of interest where they lead, not where you think they should lead, nor where convention proposes that they should. You tell your parents not to be concerned with your marketability. It's not really the issue. What you want is to get obsessed, to go for it, to really throw yourself into it, total immersion. And whatever interests you, that will make you happy. And the second lesson has to do with how you perceive opportunity. When you see that there's no pre-existing structure for what you need, it's not cause for despair. That is your very opening. That lack is your very opening. Your challenge is to fathom what's needed and then to find it or forge it. Wellesley gives you the authority to live your passion. And your passion will find a niche. You will find a niche. And you will convince others. And that is how, little by little, we change the world. Now, returning to professions briefly, strictly speaking, a profession is merely a paid occupation. But for the survival of your spirit, for your soul, you need more than that. So working with art and with artists filled me up because it's the study of human creativity. Fundamentally, through their art, artists are dealing with what it is to be human, with emotions, motivations, morals, what it is that makes a human life meaningful. Of course, motherhood deals with these issues also. And integrating the two has led me to think that the career is not so critical. It's how you live your life in service to your gifts, whatever they are, and in whatever order they are bestowed upon you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Deborah Manutman, class of 1975, is an engineer, a complex problem solver, and a policy maker. She majored in chemistry at Wellesley and went on to earn a master's degree in civil engineering from MIT and a PhD in environmental engineering from Johns Hopkins. Through her more than 30-year journey at the intersection of science and policy, Deborah has wrestled with many of the biggest scientific and engineering challenges facing humanity today, including nuclear waste management, environmental restoration, and long-term water resources planning. Early on, Deborah realized that she wanted to do science and policy together. She was particularly interested in how good decisions can be made, especially decisions that depend on understanding how the world works. In her first job after Wellesley as a science writer and editor in Israel, Deborah read a lot about Israel's water problems and water resource management in the Middle East. That was when she decided to apply to graduate school in engineering. She earned her master's degree in civil engineering from MIT in 1978. Deborah was then chosen as a Luce Scholar and used the year-long experiential fellowship to learn about water resource management in a rural setting in Taiwan. Following that experience, Deborah took a position on the Hill with Senator Daniel Moynihan of New York, actually Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, working on energy and environmental issues. She worked on everything from an acid rain research program to a nuclear cleanup project. nuclear waste cleanup project. When Moynihan became chair of the Senate Water Resources Subcommittee, Deborah moved to the committee staff. Her interest in and knowledge of water resources management came into play as she worked on the Water Resource Development Program of the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as amendments to the Clean Water Act. While studying for her PhD from the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering at Johns Hopkins, Deborah began working at the U.S. Geological Survey as a student assistant. After graduating, she stayed at USGS and focused on just the scientific side of water resources and water quality issues. Deborah was eager to return to the policy world she had left behind, so in 1993, she became Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior. The Office of Water and Science had oversight of 3 federal agencies with a total of 17,000 employees and a couple $2 billion worth of funding. The next step in Deborah's career was director at the Center for Innovation and Environment at the Progressive Policy Institute, a nonprofit think tank. For 5 years, she ran a project where she worked with a group of Republicans and Democrats, members of the House, who were all interested in environmental policy reform. The project was about anticipating how environmental laws would need to change over time to meet new challenges, like climate change, and to deal with the kinds of water quality problems that aren't particularly well regulated under the Clean Water Act. Since 2001, Deborah has worked at the RAND Corporation, a nonprofit that is focused on research and developing solutions to world issues and policy challenges. She gets to do the kind of science-informed policy that she has always loved. A few years after joining RAND, Deborah was offered the opportunity to head up a new research division called Justice, Infrastructure, and Environment. As director and vice president, Deborah expanded their work into water area and coastal protection and established an office in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, working with the state of Louisiana on its coastal protection and restoration plans. In 2014, after 10 years of serving as RAND vice president and leading RAND's Justice, Infrastructure, and Environment division, Deborah returned to full-time research as a principal researcher and professor at the Pardee Rand Graduate School. As one of a select group of senior research leaders, the bulk of Deborah's current research has to do with helping cities and urban areas cope with the uncertainties of climate change while making major decisions about infrastructure, to manage their water, to control floods, and to reduce inequality. Deborah and Paula, please come to the podium. Deborah, throughout your career, you have wrestled with many of the biggest scientific and engineering challenges facing humanity today, including nuclear waste management, environmental restoration, and long-term water resource planning. As a scientist and policy analyst, you have worked in government, in scientific institutions, and in policy-oriented institutions, and you have dedicated your career to drawing the best out of those environments. You've tackled issues that affect all of us and our children and grandchildren. And you embarked on this work decades before these issues were hot topics in the public eye. You have been consulted by the highest levels of government on some of these issues, including being appointed by President Bill Clinton to the U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. And for spending your career working to make the world a better place, Wellesley honors you.
Thanks to President Johnson and my dear classmate, Georgia. I think our class is very well represented here. I'm grateful to the committee and to the Wellesley College Alumnae Association for this great honor, and to be in the company of Marian and Maria. This is, to listen to their stories has been incredible. I do want to express my deep affection and amazement of my former Wellesley roommates, most of whom are actually here. We're still talking to each other. and other classmates, friends who've come from near and far to be here. I'm also very happy my son David is here, and my daughter Leah will be arriving. She ran into some travel difficulties. I also like to imagine my parents are here. Neither they nor I could have foreseen how attending Wellesley would have such an impact on my life. I came to Wellesley from a large suburban high school in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. Money was an issue, and for that reason, I almost didn't make it here after receiving my acceptance letter. But my father made a very gentle inquiry to Amy Nikas. I don't know if there's still people who remember Amy, who ran Wellesley's financial aid office. And Wellesley and Amy found a way to make it work for us. So I entered Wellesley with a sense of gratitude, and that feeling has never left me. So when I arrived in the fall of 1971, I planned to major in economics, and I was very certain about that. And that plan lasted until the first exam. Time for Plan B. So what I really loved that first semester freshman year was my science lab for non-majors. And so this was taken under coercion. We were required to take some lab course, and as luck would have it, that year Jean Carr was teaching the class in which she used Charles River water quality as the theme of our chemistry lab. So we were going out. I mean, we weren't in a classroom most of the time. We were getting in cars and driving and taking water out of the Charles River and bringing it back to the lab. So this was also 2 years after the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. Some of you may remember that. Fish were dying. Raw sewage was flowing into rivers all over the country. And Congress was debating the Clean Water Act. It hadn't passed yet. But it turns out chemistry wasn't the only subject that drew me in. Just about everything did at Wellesley, and so I was like the kid in the candy store. So I was jumping around and taking classes in virtually every almost every department. And I also discovered I loved to write. So all this made me realize that my interests did not fit neatly into any single discipline. This is a recurring theme, I think, for all three of us, in fact. But I somehow settled on this idea that, well, I like science and I like to write. I know I'll be a science writer. So and by that I meant that I would help to translate technical information, scientific information, into words that non-scientists could understand and be inspired by. So here's where Wellesley comes in again. There we have the Wellesley Washington Internship Program, and I landed a placement at Science Magazine. I was the first intern there. This was the summer of 1974, and got to work with some of the very best. Now, some of you may know Science not only does technical reports and articles, but the front part of the magazine is science news and policy. And they pioneered this idea. This really wasn't something that had existed before. And so I got to write a couple articles, and it just turned out to be a phenomenal summer. That was also, by the way, the summer Richard Nixon resigned. So there was a lot going on in Washington then. And there are a few of other Washington interns from my class who were Wellesley Washington interns then, and we had an amazing summer then. So my plan after graduation, to the extent I had a plan, and I was probably closer to Maria on that, was to find a job as a science writer. But first, I was going to take advantage of an opportunity to travel to Israel with chemistry professor Nancy Kolodny and her family as their au pair. I had been babysitting for them over the course of my time at Wellesley, and it was a free trip, and I thought, of course I'll go. So, and I was able to line up some freelance work with Science Magazine, but anyhow, I just thought I was going for the summer. So they returned, Chladni's returned to the US after the end of the summer, and I decided to stay in Israel for the year because it became clear that I could support myself. And by cobbling together some part-time writing and editing jobs, as well as teaching tennis. And I had no money. I was just trying to stay alive. So through a mix of intentionality and happenstance, another recurring theme, these jobs led me to water, literally and figuratively. And I guess it shouldn't have been surprising, as Georgia mentioned. I mean, it's in the Middle East. It's an arid region. There are many places in the world, of course, that suffer from too little water. And as we've seen in the last week in the Carolinas and in other parts of the country, too much water in the wrong places can wreak havoc too. So I had chances to write about water pollution in the Sea of Galilee for the Jerusalem Post and emerging new irrigation and desalination technologies while I was there. And I kept encountering these people when I was doing these stories who were actually trying to solve these problems, and they were mostly engineers. And what I realized was I love to write about what other people were doing, but I was really kind of intrigued by the idea of learning the skills to solve the problems I was writing about. So I had never been exposed to engineering as an area of study. We just didn't know about it here at Wellesley at that time, and despite the relationship with MIT, I didn't know anyone who took an engineering class while we were here. And I certainly knew no women in the field. But I proceeded to apply to graduate programs in civil engineering while I was still in Israel. This is pre-internet, had almost no information about graduate programs. So I thought, okay, where do I want to live? I'll work from that. So I thought, well, Boston, Washington. So I applied to MIT, and I applied to George Washington University. And it's a long story, but basically, MIT was the only school that would have ever taken me because, and that's where I ended up, because I had no undergraduate engineering classes. And no school wanted to take someone into a master's program who hadn't the proper preparation. But I think MIT accepted me because the door opened there because of my Wellesley degree. It was not my grades, but it was definitely my Wellesley degree. And I think it was around that time that they began to realize they needed a few good women. So one reason MIT was such a good place for me, as it turned out, was because it was one of the very few engineering programs that was truly multidisciplinary. Economics, so yes, I rediscovered my earlier interest. Decision analysis and public policy were taught alongside fluid dynamics, systems analysis, hydrology, and engineering methods. The pieces started to come together for me about how the science and engineering fits into solving environmental and natural resources problems. So at the start of my second year at MIT, I received a letter totally out of the blue from the late Barbara Lazarus in Wellesley's Office of Career Services. And Barbara asked me whether I'd consider applying to the Henry Luce Foundation's Luce Scholars Program, in which about 18, 20-somethings spend a year in Asia working in their chosen professional fields. And I think she must have been struck by the novelty of a Wellesley woman being in a civil engineering program and thought that might have some appeal to the foundation. I had never heard of the Luce Scholars Program before. And I was ambivalent about leaving the country again, but I thought I regret not giving it a try. So I did. And I ended up spending an amazing year working on agricultural water supply in rural Taiwan, learning some Chinese in the process, and developing a lifelong fascination with China, which continues to this day. And I am beyond thrilled that my friend and colleague Margaret Bowles-Fitzgerald is here with us. Margaret is chair of the board of the Henry Luce Foundation and the grandniece of Beth Luce Moore, the very first recipient of this Alumnae Achievement Award. So, Margaret, I don't know where you are. And I'm now honored to serve on the board with Margaret on the Henry Luce Foundation board. When I returned from the year in Taiwan, I pursued jobs at the Environmental Protection Agency and water engineering firms, but I got a tip from one of my MIT professors that Daniel Patrick Moynihan was looking for a legislative assistant for energy and environment. And I thought, well, might as well go talk. But I was not from New York. I knew only a little bit about environmental policy at that point, and I knew even less about energy. But the senator noted that I had degrees in chemistry and civil engineering from Wellesley and MIT, and for him, that was enough. So, okay. I also got that job because after first refusing the bourbon he offered me at my job interview at 6:30 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, I quickly changed my mind and said, yes, I would have the drink. And that was because he started, I had been kept waiting for more than an hour, and the staff entertained me with imitations of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And I had been out of the country. I mean, I really didn't know who this guy was. And then I get taken back into the interview, and he's doing all this stuff they just showed me. So that was why I went for the bourbon. So my immediate boss and mentor was Tim Russert. Tim was Moynihan's chief of staff a few years before Tim turned from politics to journalism, and if only he were around now. And Tim was the one actually that had the best Moynihan imitation. So after I was on the job for less than a year, luck struck again. Moynihan became chairman of the Senate Water Resources Subcommittee. It was the first time a New York senator had ever chaired that subcommittee, in the history of the Senate. And he asked me to run it for him and the other Democrats. And he wanted someone with technical training working on those issues, and was appalled that the committee staff were almost all lawyers. He just thought this was terrible. So this was my on-the-job training in public policy, and as Georgia mentioned, I worked on lots of different law bills that became laws back in the days when Congress passed legislation. And I learned a lot in a very short amount of time about the twin arts of advocacy and compromise. And from Tim, how to deal with the press. He was so manipulative, you wouldn't believe, but he knew what to do when he got on the other side of the table. After 4 years on the Hill, I kind of burned out on partisan politics. That's when I returned to graduate school to Hopkins. That was the only program I applied to because I kind of did the same deal that Maria did of working up the acceptance before the application process. But that was in environmental engineering, and then I went on to the Geological Survey. I had gotten married after my PhD, later gave birth to Leah and then David. So 1972, I was ready to get back into the policy world after 8 years of working exclusively on water resources research, which I loved. And as you already heard, I had this job that I was probably unprepared. I was unprepared to take on this huge management response. I thought I was doing water policy. That's what I said I wanted to go back and do. And we had these 3 bureaus within the Interior Department, and they had all the 17,000 employees. It's this huge management challenge. And the assistant secretary, my boss, she was jetting around. She was negotiating Colorado River Basin agreements and the Bay Delta Accord, and she didn't like management at all. She said, you do it. So I got stuck with all these, but I didn't mind. I didn't want to travel. David was very young, and I wanted to stay close to home. So anyhow, I eventually left that job and entered the think tank world. I wanted to write more under my own name as a government employee, rather restricted, and I wanted more flexible work hours so I could spend more time with the kids. And during this time was when I got appointed by President Clinton to serve on the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. And that was a board set up to oversee the scientific and engineering work that was being done by the Department of Energy to justify the siting of a nuclear waste repository in Nevada at Yucca Mountain. It was the only site that was being reviewed. So it's like, what happens if we say no? There had been 3 sites, but for political reasons, 2 had gotten knocked out. Anyhow, it turned out to be an amazing professional experience for me because we were right on the edge. We were supposed to be a scientific board, but we were bumping right up against policy issues. I mean, the Department of Energy was required to make a showing that this site would not leak nuclear waste for 1 million years. We don't have the technical ability to make that kind of prediction. But anyhow, I learned a lot, and it was great. But that board experience led me to the epiphany that I really ought to find a place where I could do both science and policy at the same time, rather than I was doing this sequentially. And that's how I ended up at RAND, and RAND turned out to be just the right place for me. And as you've heard now, I'm back to, after management for 10 years, back to research full-time and in with both feet in terms of trying to work with cities, urban areas that are, in one way or another, trying to cope with the changing climate, their need to deal with aging infrastructure. All that's connected. These decisions are difficult. They're contentious. There are lots of different interests involved. There's a lot of uncertainty. And what we try to do at RAND, and by we I mean I work with a group of wonderful colleagues. We do this in a team setting, multidisciplinary teams, to try to find, structure a decision-making process, a public engagement process that gets at some of the governance issues, not just the technical issues that are really at the root of these kinds of challenges. So it turns out that what I've done is not what engineers usually do, whatever that is. Even though my path kind of zigged and zagged, I kept coming back to the challenge of how to use the best technical information with all its uncertainties to improve policy and decision-making. And I also kept changing plans, as you could tell, as unexpected opportunities came along. And as you heard, the Wellesley connection runs through most of the story. And these awards are about career achievement, but all of our careers are, of course, part of a more complicated life, filled with many other relationships and obligations outside of work. We can be vice presidents of something or other by day, and mothers, spouses, and caregivers, school volunteers on nights and weekends. We make decisions every day, or sometimes they're made for us, about what will get done and what won't get done. And expectations collide with reality all the time. But I state the obvious here because I don't want to leave an impression that it was always smooth sailing, and I'm sure that's true for all of us. In the end, trusting my instincts is about what I enjoyed, worked for me. The opportunities and the good luck followed. But most important, I had wonderful teachers beginning here at Wellesley. The learning how to learn was just so fundamental to everything that followed. Great mentors along the way, wonderful, gifted colleagues, friends from whom I've also learned all along the way. And I really have them to thank for this honor. Thank you.
Wow. Marian, Maria, and Deborah, thank you for sharing your stories, for reflecting on the meaning of Wellesley, and for really sharing your life lessons with us. They are so meaningful, and I know that they've touched all of us. Every year, we marvel at the talent, the drive, and dedication of the Achievement Award recipients. What they've gone on to accomplish in their post-Wellesley lives is truly amazing. They are extraordinarily gifted, sharing the determination of all of our graduates to make a difference in the world. We take pride in their achievements, and they inspire us to bring the same passion and commitment to our own pursuits. The oak leaf, which is what I pinned on each of the recipients, and which is the beautiful pin that is given to the Achievement Award recipients. The oak leaf was selected as the symbol of the Achievement Awards because it represents the strength, quality, and durability of the college and our alumni. The acorn, also represented on the pin, reminds us of our own potential to turn the personal privilege of our time at Wellesley into a catalyst for a life of purpose, meaning, and positive difference in the life of others.
Thank you for joining the Alumni Association in honoring these remarkable women. At the conclusion of the ceremony, we hope all of you will join us downstairs in the ballroom for refreshments. Thank you again to the Wellesley College Choir and their conductor, Lisa Graham, and the Blue Notes, who have lent us their talents. And please join me now in thanking our Alumni Association staff for this wonderful evening. I'd now like to ask you to please rise as the choir leads us in singing to Alma Mater. The lyrics can be found in your program.